Welcome, everybody. This is Jeff Gedmin of American Purpose and currently temporarily with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in Prague. Sid Lipset, thank you for all you did to make this program possible today. And Greg, thank you very much, Linor and Rim, for joining us. Everybody has your bios, so I hope you're not offended if I don't give you lengthy introductions. You deserve them, but I think people would rather hear from you about the substance than me in describing your illustrious careers. The topic, or the title rather, The Closing of the Russian Mind, is a play, as you know, off a book by Alan Bloom, A Different Time and a Different Place in the United States. But I think it speaks to what we want to talk about today, which is as Russia closes and has closed in recent years its political space, interesting things are happening in the cultural sphere. And I think that subject matter is a little bit less tended to. A couple framing remarks. I tried to prepare as your moderator today, and I think I failed. I don't know quite what to make of this conversation, except you're going to tell us what to make of this conversation in just moments. I note a handful of things. I note that when the great Russian cellist, born in Baku, great Russian cellist Mstislav Rostropovich, died in 2007, one of his greatest fans at that time was Vladimir Putin, who was planning a celebration of the cellist's 80th birthday and who was visiting the cellist in the hospital. Remember, Rostropovich was banned from touring his native Soviet Union, left for the United States and the West in the 1970s, and only returned after the Cold War. I also note, as food for thought, a piece in, I'll hold it up if you can see it. It's a piece in last week's Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung with the title, Weapons, Putin, Symbols of Peace are Taboo. Despite censorship and isolation, Moscow is experiencing a boom in high-profile art exhibits. Hold that thought. And then I was preparing for today. I was reading about the relationship between Adolf Hitler and music in the Third Reich and his fraught relationship with his favorite conductor, Furtwängler, who chose not to go into exile, stayed in Germany, but to Hitler's endless frustration, refused to engage in the Hitler salute and wouldn't sign his letters as Heil Hitler. There's lots to be said. Let's see where the conversation goes. And if I may, I wanted to ask Linor to invite her to amend and correct my framing remarks or introductory thoughts. Linor, you were born in today's Ukraine, I believe. You objected strenuously and publicly to the Russian annexation of Crimea, and then again to the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. You've gone back and forth, but as I understand now, you live as a poet, I'll say human rights activist in Israel. Could you help us frame the conversation? If we're talking about the cultural scene in Russia today, I know Moscow is not all of Russia, so you pick and tell us. But the cultural scene in this big country today, where authoritarianism is closing the political door and the arts are what? Struggling, going to the margins, going to underground, in some fashion surviving. Just help us and get the conversation going, and welcome.
Thank you so much for the honor of opening the conversation. I have to tell you that, in my opinion, the arts in Russia are once again, like in Soviet Union, going into this famous split of culture one and culture two. Culture one and culture two are the terms from the Soviet era, and I'm afraid I am not ready right now to say exactly who was the first one who was the first person who introduced us to these terms. But culture one is the official culture, the culture that played into the tastes of the Soviet elites. It was published, performed, and in any way supported by the regime. And culture too was the underground culture that lived and survived among those who knew about its existence. Now, when we speak about it now, when we speak about it today, I can say that I see the split into the culture one and culture two, and I have to speak here about Svetlana Petrychuk and Evgenia Berkovich, who are right now in Russian jail for the plays that they have staged in Moscow. The play was called, it's very hard to translate, Finist Yasny Sokol. It's a play about women who are ready to get married to terrorists because they are looking for love. And Svetlana and Evgenia were actually imprisoned and jailed for the very fact that they spoke against war, and their play was only a pretext to do so. So this was, for many of us, the Watergate, the sign that the culture is now more than ever splitting into culture one and culture two. And I know about that because I published RER, and RER is Resistance and Opposition Archive, the magazine that publishes things that can't be published in Russia in any other way. And we publish culture too. So I think that among other things that we can talk about today is this split.
Linor, thank you. I want to talk just to widen the lens, and then we're going to dig deeper. Talk about a different kind of split, and I want to call on you, Rim, if I may. So as they say in the United States, Washington or Washington, New York are not America. In Russia, this large, complex country, Moscow is not the entire Russian Federation. You come from Kazan, the capital of Tatarstan. We have now a journalist, RFERL has a journalist held hostage in Kazan, Alsu, who is in pretrial detention as we speak, being held under very poor conditions. That's on the one hand, pretty serious and severe political control and repression, if her case is illustrative of anything. And at the same time, Rim, I understand Kazan to be a thriving cultural capital of Tatarstan. By my count, there are 10 universities, another 34 institutes of higher education. There's a thriving theater scene, jazz cafes, music schools. Help us understand, as a case study or a snapshot into a part of the Russian Federation, what's happening in the culture scene, how authorities manage it, how dissidents or independent playwrights and poets and authors survive there.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for invitation to this discussion as well. Just to start with the general remarks about what you asked. Yes, Kazan is a capital of Tatarstan Republic, who has really rich history and rich diverse culture. It's not like Slavic culture or Russian culture, but very specific Tatar, Turkic-based and Muslim based culture, I would say. And for centuries, Tatar culture was developing as a really separate one, pretty much close, linked to Persian, for example. It might sound strange, but during the few centuries ago, Tatar connection to Bukhara and Samarkand, which were part of the greater Persian world, and then Arabic culture, it made it pretty much more Oriental culture in comparison to Russian Slavic-based culture. So, and after the Bolshevik Revolution, as Tatarstan received pretty much a limited autonomy, but nevertheless it was sort of statehood. These new tendencies based on leftist ideology about the equality of women, for example, and introduction of Western-based cultural institutions like theater, opera, ballet. So they were flourishing in Tatarstan, and even Tatar intelligentsia did a lot to introduce. It was like a transformer of this kind of new modern tendencies from the West through Russia, Tatarstan, and further to Central Asia. Many Tatar intellectuals immigrated to Central Asia. For example, even the first secular school in Xinjiang, we call it now Xinjiang, but it was Eastern Turkestan with Uyghur population, was opened by Tatar intellectuals immigrated over there. So Tatars served as a messengers, as ambassadors of Western culture to the remote areas in Central Asia. Back in Kazan, yes, it's a big city, more than million of population, several universities, a lot of students over there. And it's a center of Tatar culture. What's going on now in Kazan, in Tatarstan, with Tatar culture, it's not new, actually. We are kind of, having sense of déjà vu these days, because many things going on in Kazan resembles things what happened during the Soviet times. It was the previous speakers already said that we can talk about the culture one, culture two situation when there is a culture, like I would say, proper culture, sometimes with the silent zones, taboos, falsified history, falsified narratives, but at the same time, some part of this culture officially accepted by the Soviet authorities that time and now Russian authorities today. So there are some spheres where you can do the cultural things. You have some list of the accepted topics. You can write about it. You can talk about it. You can make performances on about this. But at the same time, we also have taboo zones, taboo topics. You can touch them. It's mostly about the politics. And if you touch them, you will have just big problems. And usually now we are experiencing just returning those times. And that makes me really, it's really scary. It's scary because the culture becomes, the people are left kind of, with very limited options in cultural sphere. We also have great big wave of immigrants now, mostly young, talented youth who had to leave the country, and it will very badly affect the Tatar culture, because the culture can grow, can develop, can thrive only in the environment where the language is in the proper environment. But if your talented youth immigrate somewhere else to Turkey, which is a relative kind of country with a closer, historically close to Tatar communities, but nevertheless, it's different environment to grow your culture over there or to the States. There are freedom over there, but it cannot be the historical roots for this culture are not existent in the United States because Tatar communities don't have a deep history over there. So these kind of things pose a really big threat to the Tatar culture itself. I will further, I would return to this subject because there are other threats linked to the war.
Let me interrupt you if I may and ask a specific question. Then I want to go to Greg and back to Linor in just a moment. Specific question I want to ask you is not about the threats of censors and authorities to culture, but vice versa. In the case of our colleague Alsu, who is being detained, pretrial detention, what was it about her work that was perceived as threatening to Russian authorities? She was a culture reporter. She focused on language, on religion, on ethnicity, on minority rights. What was it about that kind of work, I would call it in the broad cultural space, that bothered or threatened Russian authorities?
May I just start it like again from general, showing the general environment we are in now. Now, I mean, today we are talking about the closing of Russian mind, but having said that, we have to keep in mind that the definition Russian in Western linguistic terms also includes other non-Russian ethnicities and communities who are as indigenous as Russians, maybe even have deeper roots on Eurasian space. And their mind is shrinking in a faster speed yet, because they are currently subjected to intensive and very blatant Russification policy by Putin. So their primary and true mind is being flushed out and replaced with a kind of marginalized one with some basic elements and faint remnants of their own culture, but already largely and heavily dominated by Russian, or to say better, by Ruski Mir, or Russian world ideology. And Putin's regime sees any cultural linguistic diversity as a major threat to the very existence of the Russian state. So its current silent policy is transform other than Russian ethnicities into kind of ethnographic communities, strictly within their shrunk homelands. They can entertain tourists with seasonal festivals, vodka parties, folk dances, traditional handicraft, maybe folk medicine, but they don't see, I mean, the central authorities, Putin's regime, they don't see these ethnicities engaged in opera, in ballet, in film production, and everything which makes modern nations resilient to the challenges posed by globalization, assimilation. And this is the closing mind for this tiny, well, in case of Tatars, they are not tiny. They are, I mean, 7 million of Tatars, but they are dispersed and they are under big Russification pressure now. So Alsu was our main cultural reporter, and generally Tatar-Bashkir Service was strong in its cultural reporting, and we attracted a lot of audience just because of that. So plus also organized, I mean, she led the main efforts to create and maintain our educational project called Ada Online, where we teach Tatar language in a modern type of platforms, new media. And I do suspect it's exactly the thing current Russian authorities don't like, because they want to assimilate the ethnic minorities as quick as possible. So any kind of activity which blocks their efforts they are reacting very angrily. So in case of also this is rather obvious for me.
Rim, thank you. Let me go to, thank you very much. Let me go to you, Greg, now. Greg, you're an expert on Russia. You're writing a book about Boris Nemtsov. You think about authoritarianism broadly and in the Russian Federation. Question to you, Greg, is it seems to me, if I'm right, that in trying to understand how Russian authoritarianism ticks, we look a lot at the politics and foreign policy. We look a bit, I think, a bit more siloed at economic issues, and even less so in the cultural space. Or I would say the cultural experts look at the cultural space, but the broad policy community less so. Is that true? And if it is so, are there things to be learned broadly, usefully, by understanding what the regime and its allies and disciples are doing to monitor, censor, contain theater, poetry, literature, art, music, and so forth?
Thanks, Jeff. I think that's a terrific question. And I think you're absolutely right about the amount of attention that we in the West pay to Russian culture and the Putin regime's use of it. Because I think right from the very beginning, Putin indicated what kind of a leader he was going to be through what he was trying to do in the cultural space. Now, he wasn't new, or he wasn't the first to do this. I think toward the end of the 1990s, other political figures, powerful political figures like the then mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, would appropriate cultural symbols and tropes from both the Soviet past and also the pre-revolutionary Tsarist past. And this started happening very, very quickly amid economic crisis, a backlash among the population to 10 years of sort of democratization and westernization with all the faults in the processes. And so when Putin, before he was elected to his first term in office in March 2000, one of his main campaign slogans was, "We're going to institute a dictatorship of the law." Now, most people paid attention to the law part. I'm thinking that Putin was going to restore order in a place that was pretty chaotic to outsiders. But this sort of almost, I mean, more than a dog whistle saying dictatorship in a country with a history like Russia's really leapt out at me and to many others. And really from the very beginning, from almost a quarter century ago, Putin has steadily been ratcheting up both his attack on culture and co-optation of it, both the sort of appropriation of nationalist and sort of nativist tropes that's, I think, reached its apotheosis now with the war against Ukraine and the attempt to sort of wipe out Ukrainian culture, claim a sort of Russian official cultural space throughout at least a lot of the former Soviet Union. But also the attack against dissidents and opposition figures, and the sort of it's the opposite process. If official culture is meant to legitimize his autocratic rule, the sort of censorship and prompting large parts of sort of the Russian cultural space towards self-censorship, it was meant at has been aimed at silencing critics. We see it now with the jailing of people like Alexander Skolnichenko, who was just sentenced to 7 years for printing anti-war slogans on price tags in a single shop. But this kind of thing has been going on from the very beginning, and part of it is an attempt to create both external enemies by claiming sort of the United States and also sort of Western culture as a threat to the Russian official culture and family values and religious values in Putin's description of them, but also painting these sort of critics as a fifth column inside Russia, and we've seen more and more people arrested over these 25 years almost of Putin's rule. Now there are sort of estimates of that there are about 1,000 politically motivated cases against people in who have been imprisoned. And I think that this kind of sort of ratcheting up will continue. And of course, the war in Ukraine is providing the litmus test to this. You're either with us or against us. If you call the war a war, you're a traitor.
Greg, thank you. Before I open it up to the gallery, we have a lot of talent and experience in the room today. Linor, if I could go back to you for a moment. It's always the case, I think it's always the case, whether it's Iran today or communist East Germany then or the Third Reich, that there are those who stay and find their way or accommodate or acquiesce in the artistic community, and those who go into exile, and that there's some sort of counterpoint between the two, or tension between the two, or distrust between the two, those who stay and those who choose to live in exile. Is that the case in today's Russia? You've been back and forth, and now you've planted yourself in Israel. How would you live and work creatively if you were in Russia today? And how do you live and work creatively outside the country in Israel today and relate to the people in your community who, for this or that reason, have chosen to stay?
I have to say, for the clarity of the subject, that I'm Israeli since 1989. I don't have and never had Russian citizenship. So my affair with Russia is a love affair. I never had any connection to Russia, and my favorite joke is that I have licked the Iron Curtain and got stuck with the language, with the tongue. In Russian it sounds better. But I have decided to leave because for me there was no chance to stay, first of all. There was no legal way to stay. There was no safe way to stay. I am a foreign agent. I was proclaimed a foreign agent by the Russian government. I'm only the second person who has no Russian citizenship to be the foreign agent, but which is literally the enemy of the state. But speaking of tension, there is a discourse of tension between people who left and people who stayed. But as the time passes, in my opinion, this discourse gets weaker and weaker. I do not think that, call me a paranoid, but I think that this discourse belongs to the Russian propaganda. I think that the people who are deeply interested in driving the wedge between those who stayed and those who left are actually the people who are interested in breaking the cultural connections between one part of Russian cultural space and another. I do not believe that this tension would have been that strong if it was created naturally. I think that this is not the past immigration. This is not the past in general. That our ability to communicate over the internet and to go back and forth in many cases is giving us the proper and necessary means to understand each other. And I think that we should keep this connection, and nobody is actually trying to stop this connection, except people who once again and once again try to prevent it. And I have a bad feeling about it. And usually I'm not a paranoid.
No, thank you very much. You all with less than 30 minutes to go, I think it's a good time to open it up to the gallery. If you would use the raised hand function, I'll call on you. And if I fail to see you, Carolyn or Laura will prompt me or call on you. We have several dozen people, gifted people in the room. Is there someone who would like to go first with a question or a comment? Nothing yet. So I'm going to go back to you. Oh, sorry. Who am I not seeing?
Looks like Fritz has his hand up, Jeff.
Fritz, forgive me. It's my iPad. You're at the top of my screen and the top gets cut off. Fritz, please go ahead.
No problem. This has been very interesting to hear, and especially hearing terms like culture one, culture two. And I'm curious, do these terms work in a way that I have in mind, or in Russian, is there a better term that's being used? And I'm thinking of an equivalent of Kunst, which the Nazis used very effectively and very horrifically to classify who's them, who's us, not just to say what we oppose, but also to what they were trying to advance, militarism and a Germanic sense of things. So how do these terms work? Are they similar, or are there differences, nuances that I'm overlooking? Or is there another term that perhaps is being used, just like Kunst was used?
May I try?
Yeah, please. I think that's directed to you, Linor, please.
I had the time to Google the term culture 2, Kultura 2, was introduced by Vladimir Paperny, and it was done in the early 90s. That's how I've heard it earlier, and it was done to introduce the underground culture, the true culture, the unofficial culture in the Soviet Union. So the term culture one always meant the official, the front-forward culture of the Soviet Union, the one supported by the government, and the culture two was the unofficial culture of those who didn't support the government. But it never meant the culture of the other, the bad ones, the ones we try to dehumanize. No, it was never any taste of this in what you say. But on the other hand, right now, in these days, in our days, we start to use, there are two terms that might interest you. One term is Z culture, Z culture. Z culture is a culture that is connected to Russian propaganda. It's a long story why it's Z, but the letter Z was used by Russian propaganda, now is unofficially used by Russian propaganda to mark everything that is connected to the war against Ukraine. So there are many people who self-define themselves as belonging to Z culture, and many people who use the term Z culture as something that belongs to Russian propaganda, so that supports Russian propaganda. And there is term, well, normal culture, non-Z culture, oppositional culture. Oppositional culture is probably the best one that marks everything that is not. So these are two terms that many people use when they want to talk about propagandist culture and non-propagandist culture. Maybe this explains something.
It does. Thank you.
Something like that.
Thank you, Fritz. I'm looking at the screen. Who is next? I think, I see a couple people in chat. Go ahead, Laura. Who's next?
Looks like Carolyn has her hand up.
Carolyn, go ahead.
Great, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful event. So I would just love to hear a little bit more about if you all have any ideas of how internet culture, and whether that's, the technology or memes or social media, how has that maybe spread the oppositional cultures, or has it maybe thrown propane on the fire of Z culture? How do you see technology and social media playing into these different cultures?
Who would like to take that?
I could try. I could
Please.
I could try for a simple reason. I publish Roar. Roar is a magazine, roarreview.com. Roar, Roar, I don't know how to call this in English, this short something.com, roarreview.com. I publish actually the almanac of art, culture, poetry, prose, and even sound that is oppositional to Russian government and Russian propaganda. And we are banned in Russia, of course, but people read us through VPN. And we publish an English version of every single issue of Roar, so you can read it in English. Internet is the only reason oppositional culture in Russia still exists, and social media is the reason Roar exists. When the Russian full-scale invasion into Ukraine has started, I saw that people publish things online, publish things on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube, and I have decided that probably if we put them all together, they will sound louder than apart. This is Roar. This is all. So people keep publishing on social media, and we keep gathering in Roar, and people send stuff to Roar, and we try to do it. And I think that now, when almost every outlet is afraid to publish anything inside Russia, and we can understand them, this is not my way to blame anyone, because now we are not speaking about banning or reprimanding, we are speaking about jail. I understand why people can't publish anything they can't publish. Social media is the only way for oppositional art and culture to exist, almost. And even then, people know that, like Evgenia Berkovich and Svetlana Petrichuk, they can end up in jail.
Jeff, may I say something very quickly?
Of course.
I just want to say that Linor's Roars is just a terrific outlet, terrific publication, and just a wonderful example of the rich creativity that continues to come, produced by Russians and others who most of them in exile. And really sort of illustrates the split between official culture and sort of organic. I don't want to speak for Linor, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But you started this right after the invasion last year of Ukraine, and sort of as a reader, it seemed just sort of an emotional sort of response to the war, and a place where so many cultural figures who were deeply pained felt some of them very guilty themselves for sort of rightly or wrongly complicity in the invasion could express themselves in essays, blogs, poetry, music, and so just a wonderful example. And just to sort of underscore the importance of the internet and social media. Yeah, I mean that's again that's the only way to reach inside Russia, and especially in a culture in which under Putin, you have not only convicts, former convicts coming back from taking part in the war in Ukraine, and sort of at large in society. This is also a society where school children are sort of turning in their teachers, and other adults encouraged to do so, sort of in a very neo-Stalinist way, for criticizing the war or criticizing the regime. Social media technology is really shaping culture. I mean, it can't be overstated how important it is.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you.
Greg, thank you indeed. I'm going to read questions in chat from Sarah and Masha, but I'm going to do it in reverse order and direct the second first from my lips to you, Rim. And the question is how anti-war advocates and writers in exile can influence, or do they influence, Russians inside the country. And Masha, if I got that wrong, jump in and correct me, but I think I've formulated that more or less the way that you wrote it. Rem, would you address that?
Just briefly, I mean, unfortunately, I don't have a good news for this. And my opinion is that their level of influence remains quite limited, because, the communities in Russia, they are heavily affected by the state propaganda, and it's being done very sophisticated, and it's really I can cynically say that it's really being done on a good level, unfortunately, and it's kind of new entertainment for Russians now. These political shows, these talk shows, and any kind of even poorly entertainment programs are kind of connected to the war campaign. And so in this situation, if even the Russian artist abroad used to be very popular, now the very fact that he left the country, or she left the country, and makes and plays a lot of role here, we can even see that, I mean, the case of Alla Pugacheva, for example, she's a tremendously popular person, and she's just survived so many Soviet leaders and Russian leaders. But nevertheless, slowly but surely, even her popularity is on decline. And it's not because she's bad or she's not effective enough. She's just extremely talented personality. She's a legend. But the life inside Russia, which is being more and more isolated, and really isolated, it goes its own way, and the way of the artists or persons of culture abroad, their way goes its way. So this is my opinion. Maybe I'm mistaken. I would love to be mistaken in this. I think we are muted, Jeff.
Jeff?
Forgive me. I'm going to read two because you all are putting them in chat. I'm not going to give voice to Jonathan Katz's remarks. Fritz, go Green Bay Packers. We'll leave that aside for right now. But I will say, Sarah has a different version of one of the same questions, and then we will take Jonathan's question about audience size. But first, Sarah wants to know, and I'll direct this, if I may, to you, Linor. How do people outside the country support culture two inside the country without undermining it. And, there are analogous cases, I think, of Iran, where once you're outside, you can have a little bit of a warning flag for different reasons with different constituencies. Could you speak to that, please?
Could you elaborate?
Let me then just read it verbatim. And the comment from Yelena, actually, I think I'm getting mixed up. Yelena, how can we, being outside of Russia today, support this culture too, outside of Russia today, culture too, without inadvertently undermining it or stigmatizing it further? That's the question.
Oh, I don't think we undermined or stigmatized it because it's so much undermined and stigmatized. I think that supporting it, I will tell you the truth. Supporting it now means reading, listening, thinking, just knowing about it. In my opinion, right now, this is more than enough. This is more than appreciated. This is a huge work, and I don't think that anything else is expected. I don't think that any other contribution is needed now. But like for any artist, artists in Russia, artists of culture too, need their voices to be heard. And if you read a poem, in my opinion, you've done enough. Jeff, Mike?
Thank you again. The question in chat from John Katska about estimated size of audience Z and culture two. Do we have any figures? Do we have any decent assessment or speculation?
My opinion, cultures.
Go ahead.
All of the Russia, culture too, it's good if we have 10,000 people. Because culture Z is everything Russia has, everything. Rim, please correct me if I'm wrong. But when we speak about culture too, if anything goes through social media, if anything goes through Telegram channels, sites, something, we are lucky. Rim.
Yeah, thank you. I tend to agree with you because, the problem is it's all just started. In historical terms, it's just started. We don't have even 2 years for this. Of course, the Putin's regime, was going in this direction, but the real limitation, the real blockade, the real persecution, the real repression started with the beginning of this war. And all this kind of, new phenomena like this, I would call it like, just to explain the difference between culture one, culture two, it's like permitted one and not permitted one, разрешенная, неразрешенная или запрещенная культура, which existed during the Soviet times. And now we are going back to this situation. And as all the social phenomena, it has own, I would say, incubation period. So many people, for example, compare this today's situation to the situation of the late Soviet times, which is not correct at all. The late Soviet times, the population was prepared for the changes. They desperately needed change, and they knew it. But now the population is in completely different situation, different brainwashed, level of brainwashing. And this is not passive brainwashed Soviet population. It's very aggressive brainwashed new Putin's audience. And so it's not possible to compare. And the numbers, I think we cannot, nobody can calculate the numbers for this. and it will come with, it will require some time.
So you all, we're almost out of time. I'm going to take the liberty of asking the trio a final question, and then we're going to wrap it and invite you again soon. And this time I'm going to start with Greg, go to Rim, and then Linor. Linor, if this were a starter, an appetizer, a way to open up this conversation about culture and the cultural space in Vladimir Putin's Russia, we'd like to do a little bit more. We'd like to have you back. Greg, you first. Based on what you've heard today and what's been said, what issue or what kind of issues would you like to see tackled next?
Thanks, Jeff. Well, look, I'll just, with apologies, repeat what I've said about Putin's regime sort of ratcheting up the repression as a central logic of his rule. We just saw on Friday and into the weekend attacks, raids on LGBTQ nightclubs and gay-friendly establishments, which is sort of just the latest chapter in attacks not only on the LGBTQ community for the past 20 years, but just anybody deemed not sufficiently sort of culturally Russian, right? Steeped in family, religious, what have you, sort of official values. I think, and I also think that what Rim just said is very important. That if actually Russia adjusted in 1999 with the Soviet collapse quite quickly. I mean, the Soviet Union ended without a lot of violence, partly because sort of people who had already divested from the Soviet system, which was sort of an object of ridicule for many. Now I think they're much more deeply co-opted, and I think part of the success of Putin's regime has been to sort of realize the mistakes of the Soviet mistakes that, or some of the Soviet mistakes that led to the Soviet collapse. People are still relatively free to travel. They can own private property. There are sort of safety valves that exist that enable Putin to have ruled so long. So the long way of saying that what I'd like to see discussed is what can we do to sort of help Russian society make that change if and when it comes? Because I think with the end of Putinism, it's going to be a lot more difficult for society to at least start embarking on the road to an open democratic society. It's going to be more difficult than it was in 1991.
Hey, Greg, thank you. And then let me also say thank you and the organization you lead, Institute of Current World Affairs, for partnering, co-organizing today's conversation. Rim, I'm going to go to you. One of the things that I've learned or heard often from you is the focus across the West on the center, including in the area of human rights, and the relative neglect about what's happening or what happens on, at least in my words, the regions and the periphery, which can be so vibrant and equally important. I'm leading the witness, but tell us if we undertake another step and tackle additional issues in this space, what would you like to see us do?
Well, Jeff, I think what we're talking about, it's not only looking at the regions and seeing what's going on there, but the main thing here, just understanding of the nature of that Russian state. In fact, we have not one state, we have two states. First of all, it's Moscow, and I can add St. Petersburg here, some major cities, metropolitans like Kazan, even at some point, and proper Russia. Unfortunately, they are functioning completely differently. They have their situation inside those quasi-states, they completely different. And many Westerners looking at Russia, they usually see only Moscow, and they say flourishing life over there, good restaurants, very good service, digitalization even better than in some European countries, and urbanistic conferences, forums, whatever. It's like in London sometimes. It's not. I mean, what's going on in Moscow, and many people think it's real Russia. Unfortunately, it's not. It's a state called Moscow, and the other Russia functions completely different, and the people live slightly different over there. And so all the Western experts, if they are interested in Russia, they have to deal with this first of all. And then many things will just open to you. You can start understanding Russia much more and in details. I'm curious what the other speakers think about this. So my point of view is that kind of.
Thank you. Linor, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to speak to the same, but also, if I may ask, what you're working on, and I do believe you write poetry. It would be great to know what you're tackling, how you write, and what we can look forward to reading soon.
Thank you so much. First of all, I wanted to tell Reem that, in my opinion, the name, the coinage "Proper Russia" is a fantastic name for a book. And if you will ever write a book about that proper Russia, that non-Moscow, it would be fantastic. But thank you for your question, Jeffrey. And I will start with what subjects I would like to hear about here. First of all, I can't stop thinking about the life of LGBTQ community in Russia, especially in proper Russia, because I don't think that people can imagine how it happens, especially now after the new laws. You can't imagine how difficult it is, according to my friends and according to the people with whom I talk, beyond the facade of that fabulous Moscow that foreign tourists see, or beyond the facade of Russian propaganda. That's one subject. Another subject, and I don't know how to tackle it, is what people in Russia really think about Putin's regime. We don't know. We don't know whom to trust. We don't know how to measure it, because we can't believe the official sources, but we can't believe the unofficial sources either, because people are afraid to speak their minds. So we don't know how to relate to the information about what people think about Putin's regime. And this is an extremely interesting topic, in my opinion. So that's about the topics. And what do? I write. Tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, I will finish a very strange book in Russian, which has nothing to do with actualia. It deals with 1983 and a woman who has been released from a psychiatric hospital in a non-existing Soviet city. I am writing a book in Hebrew, a book of short stories in Hebrew that very much deals with what happens now, right now. It's a book of short stories about the war we are fighting now against Hamas. I'm writing a book of Israeli Hebrew poetry. It's called Songs of Motherland in Real Time. And I'm writing a book of English poetry which has no name yet, but I'm trying. Oh, and I'm writing a children's book, a nonfiction children's book that's called On USSR, which tells about the everyday life in the late USSR, the life of their parents' generation. And I'm trying not to go crazy, which doesn't work much. So more or less.
Linor, thank you. That's a formidable and impressive, inspiring agenda. So thank you all. Linor, thank you. Greg Feifer, thank you. Rim, thank you. I want to thank from American Purpose Laura and Carolyn, and Sid Lipset, our arts and culture editor, who led in putting together this program today. Fabulous conversation. I've taken bunches of notes. Now I know I have to do a lot more homework, and I'm eager to do that. So for everybody's time, thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.